Hi everyone, thanks for joining us this morning. We're just waiting on a few more delegates joining us and then we can get the webinar kicked off.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks for coming along to our webinar today. My name is Katie Guthrie and I am Head of Data at Scotland Is, so my focus is primarily on those companies providing a data-related product or service. And Scotland Is have hosted a number of webinars in response to COVID-19, and today's webinar is focusing on data. We've got three fantastic speakers who'll be covering different angles on some of the data sharing, data protection and ethical impacts that we have emerging from COVID-19. And just in terms of the format of this session, we'll run through the three presentations and have questions at the end, but please submit questions as we go through the Q&A functionality at the side of the screen. And during the Q&A, we can give attendees the option to raise their hands if they want to talk, so do that if you want to contribute towards the discussion. So our first speaker is David Goodbrand. David is the technology partner and head of privacy at Burness Paull, so he's very well placed to give us a perspective on this. So over to you, David.
Thanks, Katie. I'm just going to share my screen. Oh, I can't do that. Just bear with me a second. Can you see my slides? Great. Hi, yeah, I'm David Goodbrand, and I think hopefully you can see my slides and everything is working well. I think the impact of COVID-19 is being felt far and wide, and I think it's commonly believed to be the biggest disruptive health, economic and societal event in our lifetimes. Data protection, data sharing and data ethics may not have topped the list of everyone's priorities over the last few weeks, but I think if you've been reading the media reports over the last few days or so, I think that's slowly changing. Issues have been flagged up with the security of certain e-meeting platforms. Concerns have been raised about WhatsApp and its ability to spread misinformation, and data collection, data sharing practices of the tech giants like Facebook are all coming under increased scrutiny. We live in a data-driven society, and with what seems like the majority of the world being online and wholly reliant on internet for home working, entertainment needs and social interaction, the stakes have never been so high. So what happens to data laws, practices and activities over the next few weeks and months, I think are likely to have a long-lasting impact on us all. And everything's moving at such a pace and with such momentum, I think it'll be difficult to go back to normal, whatever that is or was. So let's just see. So what I'm going to cover, I intend to cover sort of four themes in this first session. Keep calm and carry on. What are the regulators saying? Remote working risks at a time when all businesses and organizations are embracing and grappling with the challenges of remote working. The use of third-party apps and tech, which has absolutely exploded in the last month or so, and BAU risks, which are being magnified at the moment. Same risks, but with a slightly different lens. So, hang on, let me just go back a sec. Keep calm and carry on. And this is a quote I'm seeing a lot recently. Uncertainty is an uncomfortable position, but certainty is an absurd one. I think we've always lived with uncertainty. That's always a constant in our businesses and our working lives. I think it's just the challenges that are being thrown up by the current crisis are different and more pronounced than anything we've been seeing or used to. I think it's shone a spotlight into the recesses of a data protection law that you don't normally get to see in the light of day, and they're now out in the open. Oh, I'll get the tech to work soon. So ICO guidance. So I think it'd be quite easy to say that DP should take a back seat, that there are more important issues to tackle at the moment, but I think that would be wrong, which is perhaps not an unexpected thing from a data lawyer to say, but hey, it's also a message we're hearing from the regulators. The ICO is the Information Commissioner's Office. That's the UK data protection regulator responsible for overseeing how we process personal data, data relating to living individuals. So personal data is a subset of the data that we all hold and process in our businesses. But I think it's fair to say that data protection laws and practices have changed the way and will continue to change the way we all process data, not just personal data. So this screenshot is from the ICO's information hub on coronavirus, which they are uploading new guidance and sharing thoughts as the crisis develops. Their basic message, I think, is that even in a crisis, data privacy is still, and perhaps increasingly, is important, albeit that we are not fully aware of the, albeit they are fully aware of the unprecedented challenges that we're all facing. So bingo, I mentioned unprecedented. I think that's the first time that word's been used in this presentation. So if you had 937 for unprecedented, you've won a virtual prize. So over recent weeks, data protection regulators across Europe and UK have communicated a fairly message, which is it's business as usual. You still need to follow the law. So what are the important issues for businesses to consider? The first one is remote working risks. It's quite an obvious one, as we all sit in our spare rooms, our lounges, gardens, around the kitchen tables, we're all working remotely. And many of you will be quite used to working in an outside an office environment, but for many, including some of my network, working from home has come as a bit of a shock, and I think it may take some time to bed down for others. And it's not easy when you've got homeschooling in operation. And I don't know about you, but I've never had so much baking to sample in my life over as the last 2 weeks have brought. So all new things. So working from home, remote working, I think, is the new norm for at least for the foreseeable future. And it's shone a light into some of the data protection and security risks that might not necessarily have arisen without a change to our normal working patterns. The regulators have been crystal clear that businesses and organizations are still under an obligation, which is Article 32 of the GDPR, to ensure that personal data, which they and their employees process, are subject to appropriate technical and security measures. So in other words, the regulations apply equally in a work from home scenario as much as they do in an office environment. One aspect of the WFH phenomenon is the increased use of personal devices. And I think where employees are being asked to use their own personal devices as part of remote working, whether they're connecting to Citrix or various other platforms, I think this is raising more data protection security questions. There may not be the same level of appropriate technical and security measures in place, as personal devices will often lack certain tools that are maybe hardwired into and taken for granted in business devices, such as end-to-end encryption, antivirus software, customized secured firewalls, and automatic backup, online backup. I think all of this increases the risk of security breaches and potentially malware finding its way onto personal devices and potentially corporate devices, with the risk that business and other information can be compromised. So even for company issued devices, organizations are struggling with the ability to manage security and other updates where devices are not connected to companies' networks. sort of theme is use of third-party apps. I think it's been widely reported that the use of certain third-party apps and technologies has grown exponentially in the last few weeks. Whilst back in the normal world, I think I've used a number of video conferencing and team communication apps and technologies before. I think the sheer number of these different tools and solutions that my firm and indeed our clients are now embracing, some pretty much from a standing start, is mind-blowing. I quite like this title. I'm sure there must have been another way of trying to fit in more third-party apps and names. So perhaps you could add your suggestions to the chat window, and the winner will get a virtual prize with virtually no value at the end. So all businesses and organizations are embracing the use of third-party technologies to a greater or lesser degree in order to adapt to the current situation. Even our extended family are doing weekly quiz nights on Zoom. I'm sure you are as well. These apps are designed to replace processes and functionality that are no longer readily accessible or available to employees in a home environment. For example, video conferencing apps, team comm apps, scanning apps, and a lot of people are turning to e-signature at the moment as well. I think this is an area that has caught the media's and the regulators' attention, and questions are already being raised over the security of these apps and the lack of due diligence that has been taken when maybe onboarding, permitting, or encouraging employees to use these technologies. It may be that organizations only permit use of these technologies in limited circumstances and maybe hopefully for a limited time. However, once again, since the speed of developments at a sort of a macro level, organizations are going to have to respond extremely quickly to a new set of security challenges. So we've probably all now heard of Zoom bombing. We hear rumors that House Party potentially can steal your financial data, something that its makers strenuously deny. We're not fully aware of all the data analytics which are being run and processed behind the scenes and who indeed is our data being shared with. And I'm sure we've all been bombarded with lots of COVID-related memes and other information over the last wee while. So coming back to third-party tech again, the law does provide that organisations ought to carry out DPIA's, data privacy impact assessments, to robustly assess the potential impact on personal data before adopting any new apps and technologies. However, I think it's simply, it's a fact that for many, it's not been possible to do that robustly in a short time scale, and in terms of the way everyone's working. I think that's something that the regulator acknowledges, but it's unlikely to want to turn a blind eye to the situation, particularly if there's a risk to privacy rights. So the final point I wanted to make is that we're seeing existing BAU business as usual risks that we all know about and we've all worked with. We're seeing these risks being amplified and exacerbated by the current crisis. There ought to be an increased focus on the simple, some would say traditional data processing risks that exist. The ones I think have been largely mitigated, managed, or removed from our office environments, but are likely to creep back into our daily lives at home. Employees, including for working from home, possibly having brought larger amounts of confidential documents from office to home, and we may be surrounded by others, whether it be family, flatmates, partners, and others. So all of this can pose a potential threat, which is often known as the insider threat. You should not ignore, and I suppose follow what is good advice, which is all the obvious stuff, but keeping confidential information confidential, not leaving it out and open. Devices should be locked when unattended. Sensitive phone calls shouldn't be taking place in your garden where your neighbours can overhear. Don't forward emails to your personal email addresses to try and keep it within corporate environments. limit printing from home, and particularly with sensitive documents, and I suppose be aware of the risks of cyber attacks, phishing, etc. So strictly speaking, all of these could amount to a personal data breach under GDPR as an unauthorized disclosure of personal data, albeit maybe not all of these things might be notifiable to the regulators. So a few wee tips here would be to enhance communications with employees and take the opportunity to update policies, enhance your working from home training, and ensure that all employees are aware of their obligations to report data breaches. If you don't take these steps, and if a breach is likely to occur, then unfortunately I think the regulators, and indeed anyone else that's likely to be affected, are likely to take a pretty dim view of matters. So I suppose to summarise, whilst it's not business as usual for most businesses at the moment in this current situation, the strong message from regulators across Europe is that it's BAU from a data compliance perspective, albeit that there are some relaxations that we are seeing, such as data subject access request response times. So the regulators don't want to hinder any necessary acts required to combat COVID-19, so long as they don't undermine and are respectful of the principles of data privacy and data security. So that ends my section. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen just now, and I'll hand you over to Sorcha.
Thanks, David. So I'm just going to jump straight into my presentation, and then I think we'll do Q&A at the end. Can you see that okay, folks? Okay, so I'm Sorcha from Trace. So we help organizations protect the data that matters. So that's personal data. We have data compliance software, services, and training. So what I'm going to do over the next 10 minutes or so is to set privacy and tech in context within the current crisis. I'm going to touch on digital transformation, which is something I have good experience of, and touch on some of the key trends. And then finally, I'm going to share 5 top tips for resilience, not for rush right now. Okay. So the era of move fast and break things, it was supposed to be over. Big tech has had its moments of reckoning, apparently. So we all remember the Cambridge Analytica scandal. We had Zuckerberg in the Senate hearing. We were promised a safer, more responsible, more ethical internet as an antidote for the tech clash. We were told privacy and data ethics were priorities, not just PR for big tech. We were told the data-hungry models would be tamed, the companies would protect what they had collected, and they would be good information custodians. That was then, that was February, but this is now. So on the 11th of March, feels a long time ago now, the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 outbreak pandemic. Markets plummeted, whole industries collapsed, business models disappeared overnight. The impact for many businesses had been immediate and dramatic. I think we probably all know businesses that have probably just completely disappeared. It's been utterly devastating. And not to mention the personal toll on loss of life, loved ones, and it continues to be utterly tragic. So we don't yet know how this story ends, but we do need to adapt, survive, and continue. We need to keep going as businesses, to keep paying our taxes, supporting the economy, and ultimately the NHS. And in times of emergency, things speed up. There's a rush of emotion, a hunger, a need for innovation, for speed. Our instincts kick in. So this can be brilliant. It's a forcing functions for decisions, something I've personally experienced, driving clarity and accelerating change. This sense of urgency has a great power for positive results, whether it's bringing global scientific communities together, driving collaboration, unearthing innovation. So an example of that is when Mercedes F1, they built the breathing aid in a week, which is just astonishing. And I'm sure every one of us has experienced such emotions in the early days of the crisis, or perhaps even now. The panic, the galvanized survival instinct, along with despair, the hope, the fear, and the gratitude for what we have. Perhaps process all those emotions all at once on a personal level and also as business leaders and professionals. So there's been a rush to innovate, to adapt, to figure out what the new normal looks like across every aspect of our lives. And it's been vital, it's helping save lives, but there's been a knock-on effect. So it's been this kind of big rush to drive digital transformation at speed. And something that I experienced leading digital transformation, a company called Standard Life that you probably all know, was that it was slow, expensive, painful. I spent a lot of time convincing the board that this is something that we really needed to do. This is going back 10 years ago when digital was kind of a new world. And it was seen as, you know, on the agenda, but often a nice to have. There was this slow move to adopt cloud technology. And all of a sudden, this pandemic comes along, and it is a forcing function for digital transformation. So that's a good thing, and it's also a potential to open up lots of risks. So what are the big trends that COVID-19 has accelerated recently? So there's telecommuting. David touched on this already. We're all, you know, Zooming our families, the kids are doing it with their teachers. We're doing it with, I taught my mum how to use FaceTime very rapidly. And that comes with great benefits, but also great risks. David already touched on the Zoom bombing. We've seen food and services go on demand where they can. We've also seen, you know, pubs, restaurants, cafes just quickly go under where they don't have that capability. We've seen a big impact on events. So this event obviously would be typically something that wouldn't have been done in a webinar a number of weeks ago. The events industry has been heavily impacted, but everything's gone virtual. So it's really been a doubling down on the demand for streaming and on-demand entertainment. In terms of cloud and software as a service, it was back in 2011, would you believe, that Mark Andreessen said software is eating the world? And I think that phrase is still relevant today. Without the cloud technology, you know, how can organizations really keep working? How can they share? How can they co-edit documents? How can they e-sign documents, as David alluded to, and collaborate? So really, really vital. And then a drive to online learning. So again, David touched upon the need to keep connecting with people and to keep learning. An example that we had, so we work with WWF International, the World Wildlife Fund for Nature, and I had been due to go to Switzerland back at the beginning of March to deliver a training, but now we've developed an online global tool for their business. So that's been an interesting project. We had a plan A that went to plan B, to plan C, to plan D, but ultimately a good outcome. So going back to that concept of digital transformation, you know, the business of changing to digital technology, to embracing cloud and optimizing online customer experience, it has been slow, as I touched on, it has been cumbersome for non-digital native organizations. Updating the technology, adopting new processes and changing mindsets is tough. So this pandemic has been a powerful lever and a stick to set those wheels in motion, and potentially a gift for some leaders. It's amazing how quickly those video conferences tools, those cloud applications which enable collaboration and communication channels can suddenly unlock and be approved where once risk or information security department said no, or the business reflected. And again, something that I've certainly experienced working in a large corporate. So how do you move fast without breaking things? So as David touched upon, the regulator may be understanding of the current conditions, but certainly it's still there. And so we still need to continue and consider that compliance is still there and it's still vital. So a few tips to kind of share how to get the balance right between moving fast without breaking trust and without breaking the law, quite frankly. So thinking about risk as risk intelligence. I think it's really vital that organizations, when they are taking risks, that they do them in the right way for their organization. So to know what risks they're taking, to know the unknowns, to work back from the worst case scenario and make informed decisions. So doing the work to read the privacy notices, to make compliance real and to understand exactly what they're taking on, and then make a decision in terms of whether it's still worth it. David also touched upon using DPIAs. So I think they're vital, and obviously they're mandatory in certain cases, but it's about unlocking those processes from it being a static tick box exercise to something that's real, using smart documents, using cloud, making it iterative, making it discursive, bringing the key people in together early. Number two, don't DIY, as we've seen a lot of this in GDPR, where organizations were trying to take the base of a regulations like GDPR and just try and understand it from a few blogs and trying to implement that. It's really complicated, it's really nuanced, and you typically need a few experts working together. So whether it's in cybersecurity, data protection, data ethics, and so on. So it's bringing together of key people. Obviously that can be expensive, so using experts for points of support. Number three, a personal passion of mine, ditch the static documents. I'm extremely passionate about making compliance much more streamlined, beneficial, and stitched together. So traditional compliance is, lots of Excel documents and Word documents that fundamentally relate to the same data processing, but they're very disconnected. So that just doesn't work right now. So you need better tools. So e-signatures is something that David touched upon. That's something that we have built in our smart data processing agreement, for example. Number four, be holistic. So my background is digital transformation. I've also worked in information security. I have worked in brand and marketing. So that helps me reflect and understand that actually compliance is about the whole of the organization. So try and bring people together and use tools like video conferencing to have good conversations. Get all the key decision makers in the virtual room early, and keep that decision, that process discursive. So one of the key concepts behind privacy by design is really about getting that privacy thinking and the privacy champions, that voice in a project early. Number five, be accountable. So David will know this very well, the accountability principle right at the heart of regulations like GDPR. So it's really, really important. And I think one area that can be overseen quite easily is the accountability for a data controller to use trusted data processors, and making sure that you're responsible and you can evidence that you've vetted those partners. So rather than onboarding tools very quickly and doing absolutely no due diligence, finding a way to do at least the basics and a lean version of due diligence. So checking exactly who you're bringing into the organization, and obviously don't assume. So just making use of tools like NCSC's best practice for cloud security guidance and working back from that. So that's all. I'll stop there and thank you. And at this point, I'll stop sharing and pass over to Olivia.
Thank you, Sorcha. All right. Hi, I'm Olivia Gamblin. I'm founder of Ethical Intelligence. We're an ethics consultancy, and we help guide companies through this developing field of ethics of technology and artificial intelligence specifically. So I'm going to speak directly to you guys for a while here today. I am going to show you a live demonstration of some current tech that's out there right now, but otherwise I figured I'm not going to use slides. I want to speak directly to you since I'm going to be building off of a couple of the points that David and Sorcha said. So to start, I want to echo what David and Sorcha were hitting on originally with the fact that right now we're in this accelerated digital transformation age. We are seeing the innovation and development cycles of technology that would normally take months upon months be expedited into a few weeks and a few days even. So this is an unprecedented time. Again, David, I guess I've used unprecedented, so I've got a tally there. But it is a time though when due diligence is essentially being thrown out the window in one way. We've kind of reverted back into this Wild West situation of, all right, we're gonna solve this problem, but we're gonna ignore all the laws and none of it applies to us, which of course isn't true. And as David and Sorcha have been pointing out, the aspects of regulations like GDPR, those kind of due diligence regulations still apply even in a time of a pandemic. But what I want to build off of here is that's not the only due diligence that is both being thrown out the window, but needs to be brought back into the forefront of our minds. And what I'm referring to here is ethical due diligence. So I'm often asked, what's the difference between law and ethics? And that is, of course, a very long conversation. Never ask a philosopher, but essentially you have law, which that is the minimum base requirement that you need to meet. Of course, that is, you can't go below it. Then you're going to screw yourself over, but that is the minimum baseline. But that's not exactly meeting what society is going to be expecting out of your company, out of the technology that you're producing. That's where ethics comes in. Ethics in these kind of situations is the next step, the above and beyond the law, but it's just as important. Law hits the minimum base requirement. Ethics hits what society is expecting out of you. So what I'm going to do now is actually look at a current piece of technology being used to combat COVID-19 and actually look into the difference between, okay, it's meeting the base minimum requirement of law, but it's very much in this kind of ethically sketchy, we'll call it, area, this gray zone. So I'm going to share my screen now. Let's see here. So this technology, this is from a company called Unicast. And this is what you're looking at is a social distancing scoreboard. This is live. I'm on the internet right now. This is Unicast's live social scoreboarding scoreboard. And essentially what they've done is they have pulled together different data and created this scoreboard that essentially it grades the different states all the way down to the counties within the states on how well they're following social distancing orders, essentially. Now, they went through 2 different iterations of this. The first iteration, they were tracking data for how far a device was moving from its home base, essentially where the device spends the most time. They figured, okay, that is the person's home. How far is it moving from the person's home? And then that's how they're going to judge how well the state is following social distancing. Of course, there was backlash there. And so now they added on another aspect and created a more robust system where they're looking at, okay, not only how far is the device moving from its home base, but is it going to non-essential locations? And on their website, you can find a list of non-essential locations. These mean shopping malls, restaurants, a few other ones that are non-essentials, essentially not hospitals or grocery stores or pharmacies. So with these 2 different data sets, they've created this social scoreboard. Now, I did a lot of digging into this, and they do follow the GDPR, and since this is actually a United States-based company, they also follow the CCPA. So they are meeting the base minimum line for legally speaking. They have done their due diligence in terms of legality. They've hit that. But I want us to take a look now into this kind of ethical gray zone that they're sitting in. What I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom into California here. So we're looking at California. Now, all of the orange is a lower grade, essentially. So these areas are doing less. They're not as strong in social distancing, meaning they're moving around. They're going to what's deemed non-essential locations. They're moving from their home bases. The blue, the teal area, those are the areas that are doing well at social distancing, meaning they're staying in their place. They're not going to non-essentials. Now I want you to look at what parts are graded lowly, have a low grade, and what parts are graded high. So now California on the West Coast, what you're seeing here, this is the tech. This is the Tech Valley. That's the Bay Area. That's San Francisco. That's Marin County. That's Santa Clara. That's where all of the tech giants sit. And that's where work from home is very easy to accomplish. That's where people can order in from Uber. They can have Amazon deliver all of their essential needs to their front door. They have essentially this amazing privilege in this time to be able to remain at home and follow these social distancing measures. The center of California, the center of our valley, that is full of farmers. That's what you would consider to be the more economically disadvantaged group of people. So essentially, what this technology has done is it has broadcasted what parts of California are privileged enough to be able to stay and work from home and have all of their essentials delivered to them, and what parts of California can't, have to go to work, have to travel, can't follow these social distancing measures. Now, that would be fine if we're looking at this from a healthcare standpoint, where we're looking at and going, okay, we understand now that the majority of our resources to help combat COVID-19 are going to have to go into the valley because there's a lot more contact going on there, meaning the virus is probably going to spread much quicker there. However, this is public facing, which means I can log on, and if I'm sitting in San Francisco, I can log on and I can look at this and go, my area is doing great, and I'm going to socially shame the other areas that aren't doing well. So what this is doing is this is broadcasting the difference in our economic standing. This is an ethical gray zone. I'm not saying that this technology is wrong. I'm saying the way that it's being applied, the way that this data is being presented, who it's being presented to, there are problems being created beyond the virus. And that's now looking at what person can actually come on and sit here. If I'm coming from an insurance agency, I can look at this and I can go, okay, I can allocate some resources here. I can change insurance rates because I see that there's most likely going to be more virus here and I don't want to pay for that. We're not sure who's going to be looking at this. You have to take the different perspectives from all different angles, looking at this technology going, all right, how can I actually use this beyond what it was originally intended for? So I'm going to stop sharing now. And now what I want to talk about, now that I've shown you this kind of live bit, I want to look at a technology that's a little bit closer to home. And I'm going to talk about contact tracing. I'm going to talk about this because the NHS is starting to use contact tracing. And again, I'm not saying that this is wrong. What I'm saying is this needs to be considered beyond the virus. And that's the ethical bit. It's hitting base minimum in terms of legality, but we're entering into this incredibly gray zone, of ethics. And what I want to talk about there is privacy. Now, I'm sure you've already seen it. There's the tech ethics community kind of going crazy right now saying, okay, what about privacy with all this tech? And there's a lot of truth there. We've been forced into this mindset that we have to choose between our privacy and our health. That's a false choice. We can choose between technology that is trying to benefit our health, that's the end goal, and that technology can either respect our privacy or it can violate our privacy. That's the real choice that we're making, not between privacy and health. So when we're looking at privacy versus non-privacy, then we're looking at the actual technology and what it's capable of. And what I want to point out here in terms of contact tracing is it can be used for good. We can track the virus, we can see how it's spreading, we can figure out where the resources need to go. But again, it needs to be considered the step beyond. What has been failed to be considered here is what happens when that technology goes into the public's hands. What we've seen already is people attacking people who they thought carried the virus. Or, as we're seeing actually in Asian countries who have already deployed similar technology, their technology will alert you if you are in a location that someone else with the virus has already been in. That means it's going to have a severe economic impact. They're already seeing people avoid businesses that are reopening because that business shows a person with COVID-19 has been here. So people start avoiding that. So again, it's looking at the technology that could be used for good and understand, okay, but what happens the step after? We're not just looking, is this legal and will this solve the virus? The technology that we're creating today will be here tomorrow. The virus will be gone eventually. Well, the virus, we will move past this pandemic. The technology is creating new precedences that we've never dealt with before and will continue beyond the technology, which is where a lot of this fear in terms of the ethics behind all of this technology is happening. We're not sure how our privacy is going to be respected after this. We don't know when this unprecedented time has passed and government removes its hand in that sense of that kind of close watch of what we're doing. So this is all to say, we need to be thinking beyond the virus in terms of ethics. It's here today, it will be gone tomorrow. The tech, however, is here to stay. So I want to end on just a few quick points. While I'm giving the few quick points, I'm just going to share how to get in touch if you'd like. Normally in these kind of situations, I would advise putting in essentially these ethical protocols. However, this is not normal times. We do not have the time for that. So building off of what Sorcha was saying, you need experts at this point. You need to have someone that you can consult and talk to of, hey, we're looking at this technology. Hey, my company's doing this. What are the implications beyond the virus again? And the other point, which you can do yourself, when you're looking at this technology, when you're looking through your digital transformation, this expedited digital transformation, ask yourself, how would this be received in normal times? If this wasn't a pandemic, would there be a backlash for what the technology that I'm putting out, would there be a backlash there? If the answer is yes, you need to go back to the drawing board and you need to think, okay, why would there be a backlash in the first place? Is that something that's well-founded, and how do I essentially take that into consideration? You need to think beyond the virus now. And you need to think beyond the virus and consider, is the tech you're building today going to be accepted tomorrow when the virus isn't here? And yeah, that's it for me. So I'm going to stop sharing screen now, and I guess that's question and answers now.
Hey, thank you very much for that, everyone. A lot of good points raised there. So I guess, have we got any questions coming in? Let me just check. There's no questions at the moment, so I'd like to put a question, which I guess is to all of you really, which is just picking up on the points you were raising there, Olivia, about thinking beyond the virus. Is there anything else that can be done to sort of safeguard against some of these potential, what might be seen as privacy violations, or ethical questionably uses of technology and data? Is there anything that can be done to safeguard against them now rather than waiting until after when it's too late? Possibly from a legal perspective or from an ethical perspective as well, I guess.
You want to go first, Olivia, and then I'll pick up?
Yeah, my answer is really simple in the fact that they need to be considered, and you need to actually have that in your mind, which sounds pretty self-explanatory, but what's happening a lot in terms of these ethical risks and problems that are popping up, it's the fact that ethics has been thrown out the window. We've worked so hard to gain these ethical principles back into our legislation, into our technology, and now for some reason with the pandemic, that was the first thing to go. Like, okay, we're going to skip this. We don't need this. Ethics, when used properly, actually results in stronger, more robust technology. So bringing that mindset back into your team is one of the first steps.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm just going to say it's really interesting that this crisis is affecting the whole world, and every part of the world seems to be doing things slightly differently. In Israel, the Internal Security Agency has been allowed to use mobile location data to track individuals who've tested positive for COVID-19. South Korea is using triangulating data, credit and debit card transactions, mobile phones, CCTV, etc. And in Iran, apparently, have asked all citizens to download an app to determine if your loved ones have been infected by coronavirus. And we're also, obviously, Olivia mentioned the UK have got a particular focus as well. What is interesting is from an EU perspective, there is much more of a call from a sort of an EU-wide perspective to try and come up with a single tracking app that has got data protection built in, so that effectively it's trying to minimize some of the longer term effects of what's going on. So what they're saying is, I'm just looking at the BBC website just now, that the use of the data should be temporary and it's not here forever. It's limited just to the crisis. It's limited in purpose, so it's very clear what the purpose of the data collection is, and that it's not going to be used for additional purposes. Olivia alluded to some of the purposes, that additional purposes or unintended consequences of some of the data collection that we're seeing at the moment. It has to be restricted so that as to who has access to that data and what's used for. And the key thing is, as citizens, we need to have transparency. We need to understand what we're being asked to sign up for, what data is actually being collected about us, so that we've got an ability to control, and I suppose the key thing being to consent to this. I think it needs to be voluntary. I think if it's forced, like it's being done in certain countries around the world, I think that's where there will be alarm bells ringing from a longer term erosion of data privacy rights. So I think we need to work within the frameworks, and it's GDPR in Europe and the UK, that work well, and not, as we're saying earlier, throw that out just because there's a crisis. It's a really fine balance, and there will be judgment calls along the way, but I think we need to try and get the balance right.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I think those are certainly valid points. I've got a couple of other questions here. Do the panel feel that COVID-19 has changed how citizens expect, I think, the government to share data now when it's in public interest, or anyone? And how does that align with legal and ethical position? I think that could be for Olivia.
Yeah, I can pick that up.
Great.
So, I lost the question there. So in terms of how citizens expect their data to be collected in a time of a pandemic, and especially when it does come to health, we do see that people are more willing to share their personal data. We've seen this even before the pandemic in terms of health data, where someone is much more willing to share, yes, I will share my personal data if that means I have a shot at beating cancer, because there's that kind of trade-off. So I do believe that there is that kind of unprecedented time where people will be willing to share more of their data. It's not the problem of sharing more data as long as people know what they're sharing, know how much they're sharing, and know when that sharing stops. That's the true problem. We don't know how much is being collected or shared. We don't know exactly what it's being used for. And frankly, the scary part is we don't know when it's going to stop. We're not even, essentially, we don't know when the pandemic will end, of course. But that also means, when does this heightened tech end in that sense? When does this heightened data sharing period of time come to an end? Because there can easily be made these explanations that, okay, well, the pandemic's over, but we're still not sure if it's over. We need to continue tracking. There's no clear, this is where this stops. And so then that causes fear and uncertainty. So that's where the ethical implications come in again, is you need those clear guidelines set to essentially bring trust in that technology, trust in the government back into the government and technology from the people.
Sorcha?
Yeah, can I just jump in there? Yeah, so I think that it's really interesting at the moment. So there's obviously a different legal basis. It's obviously the 6th under the GDPR, and so that impacts what it means for data subjects' rights. So if it's in vital interest, that obviously impacts. So the government have been sharing vulnerable people's information with supermarkets. So I had a conversation with a friend the other day saying that, you know, her dad had heard from Asda, Walmart company, and had that information about his health status. And you know, that's been covered in The Guardian, where again the government has been sharing that, you know, for a good reason, and you know, protecting people's lives, the information about their health status, so that food deliveries can get to those people. But what's really interesting is, okay, well, you know, they're supposed to delete that data afterwards, but will that be tested? Will that be checked? And so I think a lot comes under this umbrella of technical and organizational measures. that actually what we really need to do right now is ask good questions. So when we talk about anonymization, can we attest that? Because you know that there's lots of grey areas and within that, and what are the true measures? Not just take it as read as yes, we're protecting data because of the technical in the organisation. So asking good questions, I think, is key, and that includes when this happens. Okay, well, what did happen to that data, and can you prove it? Because it's all about making sure that you can evidence compliance.
Yeah, I guess whose responsibility is that then to make sure of that? Is that, I guess it's part of the governance of the GDPR, isn't it? So, but the data haven't been given out by the local authorities or the government.
Yeah, in theory, there should be data sharing agreements in place that will detail and specify the reasons why the data is being shared and the reasons why it's being processed by the recipient. And that contractual framework against the backdrop of GDPR and other regulations ought to help to protect that data. I think the point being that contracts can say one thing and regulations can say similar things, but actually who's going to police that? And are we, it's not always safe to assume that the recipients will only use the data for limited purposes. And I think that comes down to the sort of question of trust about who we're comfortable sharing our data with in the first place. And arguably there's a massive responsibility on recipients to make sure that they are handling that data in a lawful and an appropriate way. And I think to be fair, it's great that we're having these conversations and speaking about ethics and various other issues, because this whole situation has shone a bright light on this area. And actually, I think it will be beneficial longer term for other data projects and apps and technologies that we're likely to see to being developed in the future, because we're rehearsing some of the arguments and thinking about some of the issues now, which hopefully will mean we're better informed and in a better position to take views on things going forward. So I think it's, I see that as a positive in terms of what's happening at the moment.
Okay, thank you. I think there's one of the other kind of statement really coming in from Dr. Poonam Malik, which is along those lines as well, around about that kind of choice of between kind of the choice between using tech now to save lives, basically, and then doing the ethical assessment and asking agreement of users. So I guess, you know, that question she's posing there about what should the government organisations choose, and how quickly does that need to, you know, those decisions need to be taken very quickly. So I don't know if anybody else in the audience, you have got the ability to raise hands if people want to speak, I think. Or if the panel want to address that. It's largely covered, I think, by the previous question. So I think if we've nothing to add on that, I guess one of the other questions we've got coming through are, could the vital interest legal basis be used to commandeer data from Google to enforce social distancing and other policing powers? And how does that balance with personal freedom? So I don't know who wants to take that one, maybe David?
Yeah, so basically, can we get data from tech giants to help governments to enforce social distancing? It's an interesting one, and I think there's a number of sort of ethical and other issues associated with that. I don't think Google and the tech giants would be very keen to share a lot of this data at this stage, but I might be wrong. Maybe this is already happening. I don't honestly know. But I think there needs to be a close cooperation between governments, health authorities, and tech to try and address some of the immediate issues. But all of that can be done in a way that is respectful of people's privacy rights and is done in a way that sort of minimises the longer term aspects of what we're doing at the moment. And I think that's key to avoid unintended consequences and longer term issues by really focusing on the issue at hand and finding a legal solution for that, rather than allowing carte blanche for tech giants and others to hoard or indeed collect, process more data about us.
just to add on to David, what David was saying there too, Google has actually published mobility reports on a bunch of different countries. I can't remember the entire total, but it's European countries, the States and everything. And these are mobility reports that hint at essentially social distancing and how these different countries are actually taking social distancing into consideration, which can be then put side by side with, okay, how's the curve been flattened essentially? I think here though, and speaking from an ethicist point of view, there's already mistrust from the public in what the government's doing with our data. If the government were to use vital interests as this legal basis and commandeer data from tech giants, we already have this concept that the tech giants know essentially everything about us. I mean, Google is in our households every day. Then that just heightens the fear and the mistrust in government rather than helping in that sense. It's better if there's the approach of government going, let's work with these tech giants and keep it all above water, bringing that transparency, David, like you were saying earlier, bringing that transparency back into, okay, we are working with Google and Google is giving us this data and this is how we're using it. And then that brings trust both back into the situation, but also helps government enforce these kind of social distancing to help flatten that curve. So in that sense, it's a win-win situation rather than I'm going to force my power over you. And the backlash of that will just cause further mistrust and continue this downward spiral.
Okay, thank you. One last question. There are about 80 ethical frameworks used across many different sectors and use cases. Are these not sufficient to work with tracing apps for COVID-19? I guess, Olivia, that might be.
Yes, I can bump back in there. They're a great place to start. Honestly, what a lot of governments are already doing prior to COVID-19, they were looking at legal frameworks that already existed and looking at how those legal frameworks and those ethical frameworks, especially from medical ethics, how those apply to technology and seeing how those translate. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We actually have this beautiful field of bioethics that have done an amazing job of setting up these ethical frameworks and that are fast at work right now during the COVID-19 crisis. And so these 80 plus ethical frameworks, we can use those, we can adapt those. Those are a great reference point already to look back to because frankly, we don't have time to build new ones in terms of the pandemic, but we can look at them and go, okay, this is in normal times what we would refer back to. So again, yeah, they're a great place to start and to use. They're a great resource in this time where it's think fast and move as fast as possible.
Okay, thank you very much. Lots of good points raised there. I think we're kind of, I'm looking at time, I think we're kind of closing down. And just before, I'm going to just share my screen too. So I think before we close, there's just a few last points that I'd like to make. So first is just really to let people know about a few other events we've got coming up. So our next COVID-19 related webinar is tomorrow at 11, and we've got Richard Marshall, who's an ex-research director with Gartner, looking at how technology trends are likely to be impacted by the current situation. And you can register for that on the website. We're also planning a few webinars on non-COVID related topics. We'll have a webinar to go through the planned changes to immigration policy and what that will mean for businesses. We don't have an exact date for that, but it will be held in the week commencing the 20th of April. So if you're interested, keep an eye on the website or let me know and I can make sure you get an invite. We are holding a weekly open office on Wednesday afternoons between 1:30 and 2:30, which is just a drop-in sort of session where different members of Scotland's team will be on Zoom with a cup of tea. No fixed agenda. Details are on the website for that as well. And just one last ask. We have a survey which ends today, which is really an addendum to our annual survey, which we look at the general survey around about the state of the technology industry. that was conducted before COVID-19, so we're just looking to update that. And the survey, I posted it on LinkedIn this morning, and it closes today. So if you're able to give your views on that, that'd be great. Also happy to hear directly from people about challenges you're facing, how we can help, any topics you'd like to see covered at future sessions like this, just for a chat, please get in touch. And I guess lastly, I think it's some really interesting debate. I think we could have gone on for much longer this morning because there's so many questions that this brings up, especially the ethical questions. So I'd just like to say thanks very much to David, Sorcha and Olivia for some good presentations and some good discussion. And thanks to everyone who's taken the time to come along this morning. So thanks and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.